I've said it more than once on this podcast that the idea that law and governance, I guess they're related, are a lagging indicator. Traditional governance models, they're built on clear lines of authority and responsibility. They've worked pretty well for the last, several thousand years, but they're struggling now to adapt to systems that are distributed, they're opaque, and in the case of AI, you could argue they're literally evolving. So as pressure builds, institutions are facing a critical inflection point. How do I adapt to new forms of coordination, control, even if the word control even makes sense anymore, and risk? How do I do that without getting out of step with the systems that I'm meant to be governing in the first place? Welcome to another episode of the AI Forecast, proudly sponsored by Cloudera. I'm your host, Paul Muller. Join me along with leading companies and industry experts as we explore the past, the present and the future of data and AI in the enterprise, and a couple of other topics today, actually. Well, today we're joined by Preetha Bedi. Preetha is an independent researcher and technology governance specialist focused on the intersection of AI, space infrastructure and quantum technology. She also brings a deep experience across the financial services sector, critical infrastructure and regulatory systems, as you might imagine, and how we apply governance to emerging technologies in those industries at scale. Founder of the Technology Tipping Initiative, try saying that 3 times fast at 10 p.m, and the Tipping Point Index, modelling how interconnected technological risks can exceed governance capacity. Welcome to the show, Preetha.
Thank you, Paul. It's an honor to be here. So thank you for having me. It's great to talk a bit about the work that I'm doing in the space, AI quantum Nexus space, as I call it.
Excellent. Well, I'm really keen to find out more about this and how the three relate to each other. But before we do that, as I've said many times before on this podcast to our guests, we're kind of a dessert before dinner kind of podcast. We do our lightning round at the beginning to warm us all up. Most people do it at the end. So are you ready to play the lightning round game?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. It's 4 questions. They're always the same. You might have heard them before. First question, Preetha. What would people who know you best, they could be your work colleagues, they could be family, say is your superpower?
Pattern recognition, connecting the dots before the consequences are seen, is what they would say.
This is where I have to ask you, are you an AI? No, I'm just kidding.
I find that I think like them nowadays, but I'll tell you a bit about that, but yeah.
All right, next question. The most impactful technology of all time?
The semiconductor chip, because I think that's where the physical infrastructure comes in with geopolitical sovereignty, as well as the AI models. But it's also not about who controls the AI models, but who controls the chip.
Interesting. All right. We talk about what AI is going to automate for everyone else on this show all the time, but what would you like to see AI automate for you in your future?
I use AI differently, to be very honest. I don't use it for automation, but accuracy. And the way I do it is I pit the models against each other and I have a lot of fun with it. And that's why I said I learned that I probably think a bit like them or they like me. And it's really interesting, Paul, because I find that they love to understand what their competition is doing. So when I tell ChatGPT or a Claude that Gemini AI thinks like this, they're like, yeah, I expect them to be thinking like this, but we bring this to the table. But then, for a balance of opinion, it all sounds good. And sometimes I ask them, are you hallucinating? And then they go back and recheck themselves and reconverge and re-trigger, and they're like, I'm so sorry I said that, but actually this is the right answer, So there's a way I think we can engage with them, but that's how I use them.
I love that. That's a fabulous bit of insight there. So the generative adversarial networks, you're using them adversarially. It's very cool. All right, last but not least, you work with data a lot. You think about the future. You look at patterns. What are some of the best practices, tips, tricks, hacks, for want of a better term, that you've learned as someone who works with data?
For me, it's a simpler view, which is visualization. And I look at it like the Nancy Duarte style, which is not just about graphs, but about storytelling, because data will tell you what is there and the visualization will tell you why it is and what you do with it. So that's how I use them. And it's easier for me for the pattern recognition as well.
I've got to ask the question, if you're good at pattern recognition, Antakshari, the famous game in India, are you good at this one?
Oh, yes, very, very much so.
Maybe you could explain it to people who aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, of course. So Antakshari is a game where you sing typically Bollywood songs, but then when you go nationally, the states may sing and pick songs from their own state. So if you go to the state of Maharashtra, where Mumbai is a city, they may want to do Antakshari in Marathi. But otherwise, Antakshari is typically done in the national language, which is Hindi, and it's typically all the Bollywood songs. And you start with M because the way the poem goes, you kind of end with M as the alphabet, and then you start singing the song. And however far you remember, you stop there. And whatever is the last alphabet, you pick that, and then the next person has to sing something back. If they cannot sing something, then they've lost the game, or you get a point or so on. So that's how we play. That's what we use Bollywood music for.
I love it. And it's again back the idea that you have to take the last sound and start from the next place. It's a fun game to watch. I've never had so much fun as watching colleagues from around India competing with each other in this game. It's a lot of fun. Unfortunately, I don't speak any Hindi, so I had no idea what was going on.
We can do it with English music.
I've never seen the game in English, which is interesting. But you're right, it should work in any language, but it's something distinctive to Indian culture. I love it so much. I suppose you could teach an AI to play it probably, couldn't you?
Oh, yeah. Now, with the Melody app, the Melody app that's come in, right? You just give a verse to it and it'll sing for you.
Oh.
So, yeah. So it'll create of course, there's AI creating music and so on and so forth. But people who write verse, which I haven't tried out yet, but I know some other folks, they try and give their poetry to the AI. It's called Melody, and it will sing a song for you or generate
I'm going to
music.
jump onto Claude when we finish this, and I'm going to see if I can teach Claude to play Antakshari with me. I'll see how we go. The most trivial use of AI ever.
Claude has emotions.
Yeah, well, we could get onto a whole nother.
Made me quite happy.
Now you're going to get me upset. So we were talking before the show, talking about today's topic, and it's going to be really tough. Listeners who know me well will know that I am incredibly curious and I like to go down little rat holes. So I need to be cautious with this podcast because, as you described, you sit at the intersection of AI, quantum, and space technologies. Three things that I don't think, well, I suppose I have thought of them being in the same sentence in Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 A Space Odyssey, right? It's probably the only time I ever thought of them in the same place at the same time. But I've got to start with, I'm fascinated. How did you find yourself at that point? What was that something that you, as a little girl, you thought this is my career, or did you find it by accident or misadventure?
A lot of everything, actually. I wasn't going to go there, but as a kid, I was like, I'm going to be an astronaut. That was a thing that I was going to do. Then I thought I should be a lawyer. And then I was like, I'm not getting into engineering because in India at the time, law wasn't paying well enough. So I was like, yeah, I have to go and do something else. So I might as well become the engineer. And then I was like, I didn't get enough grades for that engineer. Maybe I'll just do physics. That's it. I'll get to astrophysics. I'll get there and I'll be the astronaut. And then as I was finishing my quantum mechanics and so on and so forth, I was like, I found computer science. And I was like, oh my God, I love this. So I'll go and do that. And then I was doing all of that. And then, in tech, I landed in regulatory and compliance. And I was like, good. I'm using my legal hat. But that's kind of how those things came together. Still not got to do with space, AI, quantum. Because to be fair, that kind of started, it was very organic, like 4 years back. And it's not related at all to the topic. But what happened was in 2022, Storm Eunice happened and the roof of the O2 blew off. And I was thinking of it from a risk perspective that, the UK built the O2 as a posterity monument. And how can the roof of it fly off? Is it that we never had a storm of that degree? I mean, the data angle came in. I was trying to look for data. And then I realized they didn't build it. And then I realized that is probably how humans think of risk, which is when there's a commercial angle, we like to think of it as, it's not going to happen. Let's get with the commercial angle. And that's what I found in the industry as well, because I was working on compliance and regulation, and in the financial services industry and critical infrastructure. And it's always like, how can you ask if AWS is ever going to go bust? How can you even ask that due diligence financial question? At that point, we were out there in 2015, 16. By 2022, we were like, we better ask the question. We know it will never go bust, but we'll at least ask the question. So so that's kind of where the thinking started. And then I sat with it for 4 years. I kid you not, Paul. I sat with it because I was like, yeah, there's not enough data, and the AI was not up to speed. 2023 happened and so on and so forth, but still I was sitting with it. And then this year in 2026, I was like, let me just run a model. Let me use some of that quantum mechanics. Let me put a fractal theory to it. Let me bring the three things together because I think it matters, and then see what that stability index will look like. So it's, I guess, an organic path in that sense. Bringing together all the things I thought of as a kid, but that's how I got there.
That is amazing, and I think it's well, I mean, in many respects, you were almost preordained to be here, as you say. That interest in law, moving to physics, and then back into computer science. Talking about governance and risk in the age of tremendous technological breakthrough. As I say, it's almost like you were meant to be here, kismet, as they'd say. So we could talk about so many things, but let's talk about this risk. Let's talk about this risk and governance angle to begin with, because it is an interesting one. I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I mentioned it at the start of the show. My little saying for this is that the law is a lagging indicator. And what I mean by that is most laws where people try and predict how the bad guys are going to behave tends to fail pretty badly, right? It's a failure of imagination most of the time. So the law has to deal with what people actually do, not what they think they're going to do. Or in the case of, I suppose, AIs and quantum systems, again, it's the same thing. You probably can't predict what the consequences are going to be. You just have to deal with them as they occur. The challenge as I see it is the speed of change when it comes to people and societies, measured in decades usually, right? Maybe in years. But the speed of change in this environment could be measured in nanoseconds. What's your perspective on why governance systems are at risk of failing us? Maybe what's your perspective on governance and risk in this new age? Is it the same? Is it similar to mine, or do you have a different point of view?
No, it's absolutely similar, but I suppose I will lift it the 30,000 feet before that, alluding to the earlier point that you had made, which is, you hadn't thought about it as space, AI, etc. coming together. So I want to start there.
Please.
Because now we are in a convergence forum, and we don't think like that because we're doing siloed governance for one, but we forget that our satellite systems are running the economy on the ground. We forget that a cyber attack on the satellite systems means wind turbines did go down. It was not just a security incident. It means that we are taking decisions on the ground using satellite technology in such an integrated fashion, but with certain niche players, that we're kind of losing the plot because everything is happening all at an integrated scale. So we have to almost shift perspective first. So that's why I like to draw that 30,000 feet picture first and say, you got to remember that this is happening. And it's almost like, tell everyone, including the viewers, to go and watch A Day Without Space. There's a very short movie that is on YouTube, I think. It's called A Day Without Space. And it tells you how you will be living if space goes down for one day. And we think that everything is about the cloud and it's all happening on the ground, but a lot of it is up there and we forget about it. We don't probably necessarily relate to it. So that's one. And the second is absolutely the governance is very, very slow. And, and it's a challenge for me, and I have put out some solutions for that. But I found that most interesting when I was talking to space lawyers as well, not just tech, but space lawyers who are like, the political will is very slow. It takes time to put a law in place and regulation. And I think that there is a way to solve the matter, because in my opinion, is agile lawmaking. If you can do agile development, you can do agile lawmaking. And the precedence is there because we had COVID. The COVID Act came in 2 days. So there's no stopping us from making sure that we create a framework that is agile enough to actually investigate and assess the tech ecosystems on an iterative fashion, as opposed to I have a law, I will go back in a year and then I will update it in 2 years and I will have 100 people kind of signing off to this in order to make this happen. So I think it's that is the governance gap, which is first you got to get your law, but you can't have it the traditional way. You have to shift focus. So that is how I'm trying to engage with law institutions, etc. I've put out a proposal on that as well to see how we can make agile lawmaking come into the fore. But that I think would at least be a one first step in that whole governance journey and how we take it forward.
I mean, so many questions coming off the back of that. So where do we start? Do we start with quantum, space, or AI? Because I recognize there's a nexus, but they're each kind of traveling in different paths. So let's maybe start with the terrestrial. So start with the stuff on the ground, because I suppose for most of us, the boundaries are a little bit more easily understood than space, which has its own sovereignty and jurisdictional issues, right?
Yeah.
So if we start with AI and quantum, there's this talk of the so-called singularity, that we're sort of racing to this point where, the computers will be indistinguishable, if not smarter than a human. And there's different arguments about whether we're there or are about to be there or could ever be there. There are certain people who say that computers are only ever going to be karaoke at best. It's not going to be a genuine simulation. What's your perspective, I suppose, on quantum and AI, where we are, and what are some of the governance or risk challenges that they represent to people that you think we should be talking more about?
So I think on top of everything that I said, the first matter is the architecture of consent. Because I find that, and I find that we have a very narrow approach to consent, because we thought we have GDPR and that will solve whichever faction of GDPR across the globe, that will solve all matters. I.e., when the data comes in, we will query it, we'll figure out and we will handle it. But actually, the matter of consent is wider. And to me, it's democratic consent, because one is the pace of development is so accelerated at the moment that the governance can't keep it up and you have all of the governance challenges. But the other angle is the decisions and the outcomes that come out of it. Even AI, if we take today, forget all the grander singular visions. If you take it from an AI worker perspective, the employment displacement that has happened at a global scale is monumental. So, and we are not able to handle it. The employment tribunals will handle it from their perspective. The employers handle it from the perspective of, I need to get this AI out. And the other regulators, if any of them are coming into the fore from an employment perspective, they will have a very narrow view. So you've already got this problem in place, which is governance is not up to speed as compared to where the AI is. But then if you accelerate that to the civilizational scale, the employment gap that has happened. I'm all for AI, by the way. I love AI. I have to always state that, because some of my comments make folks feel I don't love AI. I actually love AI. I've grown up on reading Isaac Asimov and all the Foundation series. Yeah, just so everyone is a bit more relaxed. But that does not counter the fact that we did not do an analysis of which are the competencies that we actually want AI to take up. Okay. And if we want them to take up everything, then did we actually think of a displacement fund for the rest of humanity? Because then that's going to eventually happen. And if we didn't think of any of that, then did we at least ask permission? Who said that all these workers who are unemployed want to be unemployed? Or forget the unemployment level. You can look at it from a different angle. Think of SaaS now. SaaS is being displaced as a technology because you've got AI platforms. And that's great. I mean, that's an alternate solution. Fine. But the alternate solution also then reduces competition, because the depth that you had with the SaaS solutions, you don't have it on the AI platforms who will deliver those SaaSes, because they will be niche technologies, which means we are again intersecting our concentration risk and trying to manage monumental impacts without, for me, coming back still to that consent architecture. Who signed this off? Who said that this is where we should be going? While there is a lot of benefit that we have rendered back to humanity, and that keeps happening, that does not mean we should not ask the question. So to me, that is the biggest gap right now. When we call it governance, etc., yes, that is there. And I think specifically we try and address this very pointed. We think we should have a chief AI risk officer role. or we should have a chief space officer role. Forget quantum and space. Chief AI risk officer role. But what does this AI risk officer do? Objective is to launch or roll out AI technologies, which is fine because that's their remit and they have to do it responsibly, which is fine. But is the AI officer asking, if I roll this technology out, what is happening to the employees in the organization? Not necessarily. So, it's a very, in every angle that we cut and the solution that we provide, to me, is siloed. And that is why we have gaps that are so wide.
No, I think I'm tracking. As I said, this is a big topic. I mean, one of the things you talk about just then was this idea of, I suppose, you're talking about displacement as an example, the idea of consent, and it introduces the question of consent with who or from who, because again, I go back a couple of centuries just for the case of, to make the point of a little bit more extreme. Let's just talk about the Luddites and the weaving mills, right? The idea of the automated weaving mill. That was a big employment displacement argument several centuries ago. The consent conversation was geographic. It was relatively local, yeah? A few hundred kilometres around the problem, maybe a few thousand kilometres, but it was very local. You knew who to speak to about it. You knew where to protest. You knew who to ask to stop if you wanted to, for example. Now, obviously, that didn't happen, and we went ahead. This is a more borderless problem. Like, how do you govern something that literally? It feels like it's a UN level thing. I mean, this is literally a pan-governmental, pan-societal problem. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, but in a threefold way. Because one is the agile governance framework, because unless we fix lawmaking, it'll never happen. But we need a regulator for technology, as opposed to regulators for security, as opposed to regulators for satellite comms or communication, as opposed to regulator for outsourcing, all of which is good and which should be there. But you need like space AI risk, I call it the council, that exists, that looks at end-to-end technology assessments. So I think any assessment, or if you want to talk about small action that you can take, it's a technology assessment cross industry. That will solve matters a lot more, as opposed to any big actions we want to take, because the impact of AI it is a cross industry impact, which is again coming back to your point of who do I ask, even because actually no one exists that I can ask. So I need to create a body or get some existing groups together. I need to fix my lawmaking so that becomes agile. And then I need to create some funding, because there needs to be an AI tax, a space tax, a quantum tax, because it's not just about typical corporate tax. It is about the fact that there is an impact to a day in the life of, and there is goodness to it, but there is also elements of sustenance and I call it the ikigai, people who thought that they learned something and they gave back to society as well as generated some revenue for themselves, and finding that they lost their strength, for example. Because actually, when we talk of employment displacement, it's quite huge.
Look, I'm a bit cynical about technology. I don't know if I'm as animated about the employment displacement argument, and not out of any lack of empathy or care for the people who have lost their jobs. I have a tremendous amount of that. More because I think to myself, it's hubris, it's an error on behalf of these employers to think that the productivity gains they're expecting are actually there and that they're still going to need these people.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little premature. I think it's overly optimistic, and suffering from confirmation bias as I do, I keep looking for data points to prove my point. And there's a lot of people talking about these software companies, consultancies rehiring people back in as they realise these automation tools are not as good as perhaps the initial pilot suggested they might be. So I don't know if I'm as concerned, although, as I said, we're rapidly accelerating the technology. My question for you is, should we try to legislate this? Is the law too blunt an instrument? We didn't stop automated weaving mills, and the textile industry now employs more people globally than were existed in Europe at the time that they were breaking these automated weaving machines down. I mean, no one lost a job, really, right? There are now more jobs in that industry than there as I say, were people in Europe at the time. So governments aren't particularly good at this stuff, I find, right? Generally speaking, can only take a best guess and hope that they don't cause more damage than good when they make a law. How do we get this right?
So I think there is already a law for that, which was the precautionary principle that got instituted in the 90s with all the nuclear disarmament and the impacts of nuclear fission and so on and so forth. And what the precautionary principle states is it doesn't limit the breadth you have for innovation, but it says that if what you're innovating will have an impact to human life in the context of how you understand, then you must put a precautionary measure in place, even if you cannot prove that it is going to create a problem. So we actually have a law or a principle that is stated by the UN to say this is how we need to operate as, let's say, human beings at civilizational scale.
Mm-hmm.
But you're absolutely right that it is always used with a pinch of salt, I think, because the lawyers are always very resistant because they're like, I don't want to stifle innovation, as with governments, and everybody cuts at it from that angle. But I think we should just use the precautionary principle for what it is.
Yeah, well, I think there's a precedent if you look at biological agents and the role that the World Healthcare Organization plays in setting up protocols to say, hey, it's not a good idea to do this stuff in a petri dish on a windy day outside. That's probably a really dumb idea. If you're going to play with this, they've obviously got levels of containment proportional to the risk. I suppose if I could put words in your mouth, you're suggesting the same thing for some of these non-biological life forms that we're creating. We should be treating them with a similar kind of protocol.
Yes, and I think the only thing missing is planning and consciousness. We are so enthusiastic about the innovation and the commercial elements that it will land. We are forgetting that the commercial advantages to obviously the tech businesses, obviously to governments, but not necessarily the people at large. While people in the interest and as they engage with it, of course, they'll get some benefits, but there will be a large amount of non-benefit as well. So it's not, my view on this is not stopping stuff, but certainly taking a step back. And there's magic in pausing, right? And to think about, why are we doing this? What is the benefit of it? And how can we do it better without it outpacing ourselves? We can't keep saying that now the AI will go and we will create human consciousness, and of course, we will pay you a displacement fund. That's not the answer to that, because if you, by you, I mean, if any individual wants to go and create human AI consciousness and a convergence to it, that's fabulous. That's great. Go and innovate. But that doesn't mean we've got to implement it, and compensating a fund for me or for any human being is probably not the answer. So this is what I mean by having that think and the step back. And, Paul, I'm not necessarily alluding to the employment displacement because that is the topic that I'm most interested in. But I think this example is prevalent everywhere. Because if you take space, and if you think you want to launch 1 million satellites into low orbits, fabulous, great idea. But have you thought about the fact that the space is still space? It maybe is called space, but that's still a defined area, so to speak, low orbit Earth. And if you get 1 million of them out there, when you don't have a navigation mechanism that is cross-nation in this instance, then how are you going to get those vehicles to move on a traffic jam? And that's not just it, because if you have to then decommission those satellites, the default mode is when they come back to Earth, they will be incinerated. If you're incinerating them, you've already introduced lithium into the atmosphere. And Feb 2026, we've got data to say that's 10 times worse than what used to be there as lithium in the atmosphere. So you've already introduced that. And now we're at 10,000 satellites in low orbits, I think, something of that number and nature. This lack of thinking is there everywhere. And that's not the only thing. It's even for you to send your own satellites upwards, because a debris of zero point 0.8 millimeter is enough to cause damage.
The so-called Kessler syndrome, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And, as a person who I own and operate a space domain awareness business for scientists and governments and so forth, as one of the businesses that I own. And the concern that we've all got is that this once common area above us all is now being polluted like everything else. So
yeah.
Different sort of pollution, but yeah, absolutely. So my question, space is an interesting one, and it's clearly a multinational issue, but one that seems to be being dominated by national companies, which is an interesting concept. Tell me where quantum fits into your risk and tipping point framework, because that's quantum, I've said on this show before as well, it's a little bit like nuclear fusion. It's 10 years away and always will be, right? It's something we've always said, we're nearly there, but you never quite get there with quantum computing. Why should I be worried about that or thinking about that?
I think 2 or maybe 3 reasons. One is we have, I think, 4 or 5 quantum supercomputers already. China has given one out for free, or some measure of it already. So it's not even like the paid ones that Google and others have. That's one. But the second is, because of the pace of AI development, because ultimately we have to remember what are the models that will sit now in the quantum state, i.e., they can operate in dual states and figure out solutions and so on and so forth. You're only amplifying the pace. You're quadrupling the effects, probably, or whatever is the multiplier that we want to apply. And that is why quantum computing comes in. Because I think 2 years back, you're absolutely right. It all started with a big gung ho, and then they said, we will take our time with it. We will slow it down. Don't worry about quantum computing. But then now, with the movement of AI coming back to it, and the pace at which we have developed the chips as well, which are going to render the solutions, it is there and it is available. So the only question is, how many people are going to access it? So that is somewhat limited at the moment, but that is not so different from where AI was 3 years back, right? How many people are using it? But as soon as it starts and something opens up, like a spike event, in this case it was ChatGPT that happened, and that was a spike, there will be an open quantum supercomputer that's opened up to the public that's created a spike. But the notion is still the same, which is, we are forgetting that we have done this before. We are forgetting that our pace of evolution or acceleration is different to what it was 50, 40, 30, 10 years back. And that is where the difference will then come in, to say your index of that tipping is not going to be the same. It's all a case of compounding each other rather than one thing causing a problem. Because as soon as it compounds, as I said, for me, it is as above, so below, i.e., sea cables to cloud infra on land to satellites in space, everything integrated. And imagine if it's also a quantum computing solution, and it will be cross industry. It's not even going to be limited to an industry. The scale of the problem will be different. So why not think about it sooner than later?
Absolutely. So tell me then a bit about the Technology Tipping Initiative and the Tipping Point Index. How do they work?
So it's a global stability index indicator that has basically a formula to it that looks at the grading of space, AI, and quantum in different risk measures. And by different risk measures, I mean the human angle to the technology angle to a reputational angle. It has these factors that go in and a mathematical formula at the back of it to give you one GSI or stability index. But while that may be an overall tipping point framework formula, different agencies, for example, can pick at it differently, because you can pick that formula and say, I'm not talking about everything in the whole world, but I'm talking about, let's say, satellite orbitals in this instance, because I want to figure out the navigation of that satellite in terms of the propensity of being hit by another, say, satellite in this instance, from a grading perspective. So you can pick that same mathematical formula and then apply it in the scenario in the context of, and figure out what you're tipping for that sub problem. But that's how I've set that a formula up, and I've applied some fractal thinking to it to get, because all of the problems are typically repeating patterns. It's just seen at it from different industries or different lenses, but your grounding is the same, which is it will repeat. So I have applied that repetition model to figure out in that formula how I'll come out with an outcome and see what it could be. I've not layered data onto it, which is what I'm talking to agencies about, to say, for your particular data set, then can we work together? But that's still in the pipeline. But that's my thinking at the moment on having a sort of, to put it simply, mathematical formula. I'll test whether it works. I think in principle it does, or my thinking is it will. The pattern says it should, but we will see as we keep trying it out.
Interesting. So when you say fractal, sorry, you got me interested on that specifically, like a Lorenz attractor or?
One of those, but I'll just put it as into a self-repeating loop. Whichever pattern I detect for the formula in terms of the attributes that are applied, I will put it into a self-repeating loop to see what the generated outcome will be. Because that's how we work on the ground with all technologies. We are always in a loop. So
feedback loop.
Yeah. It'll be a feedback loop. Yeah.
Love it. All right. So this all sounds like a problem for governments and the United Nations. If people are listening to this and are thinking, this sounds like someone else's problem, I can't control the satellites, I'm not going to be able to stop the role of technology. Interesting podcast, Preetha, but I'm going to get back to doing what I was doing yesterday. How should our listeners be thinking about maybe something small or meaningful that they should be doing in changing their decision-making in the near term?
I will urge, I completely agree with you, which is why I thought I should solve this problem and asking anyone else. Like, somebody has got to do it. Well, why not me? I have this idea. Why not? But more seriously, I think governance is something everybody can think of. You do not need a body. You do not need to get to that full solution in order to think of governance. I think as listeners listen in, organizations listen in, they can think about the end-to-end governance as opposed to saying, I have to get the AI model out. So it's just a slight tweak your thinking there. But the other angle is, I mean, the LLM light happened, right? We can't forget the basics. So, sorry, CI/CD pipelines, we actually thought that will not be put under control measures because we're doing AI. That thinking has to shift. And that, I think, is a small action that everybody, listeners on the ground, can take. Certainly developers, because you don't need responsible AI to come in and tell you that shouldn't have happened. So I think a combination of these two will be good for a start. But you're right. I mean, all the rest is like, it is somebody else's problem and it is all evolving. But yes, everything is someone else's problem. But for me, at least my objective and vision in this is, while I try and contribute some solutions to it, etc., the rest is also changing mindset and shifting thinking, because that, I think, is useful. Else we have to think about what is the legacy that we will leave behind. And I think about it like that. And everybody thinks that, oh, but this is not my scope. It's below my, I don't know, so to speak, pay grade, or it is not what I do on a day-to-day basis, and so on and so forth. But it is still a question that matters, right? And I think of legacy not necessarily as the economics of what we leave behind, while that is a big angle. The other is also, what about the orbital commons? Like, what is the state we want to live it in? Or what is the digital commons in this instance? Because technology is for everyone and everyone loves it. And we are all innovative by nature. But does that still mean that our children should not have an option of which subject to choose from? Because in some cases, we are closing down subjects because actually that will not generate a job down the line because AI has already taken over it. Or, it's things like that. Are you actually going to limit the next gen from doing social studies, for example, because
Yeah.
it's not in the top 15% of the outcome of the metric. That's the number that we ran with. And then we forget that it's the social scientists who bring responsible thinking into AI as well.
Yeah.
So it's things like that, but that's how I see it. But I think at least these two small actions are a good way for everyone else to start. Otherwise, we had fun, of course, with some tea here.
No, it was good. I really enjoyed it, and it's been thought-provoking. And I agree with you, and we have again, I've said this multiple times during today's episode, something else we've talked about on the show before is, what are our grandchildren going to say, right? Is they'll look back and say, hey, it was pretty obvious this was going to go wrong. Why didn't you do anything about it? So I think it is important. And a word of advice you gave then was pause. Just every now and again, pause and ask yourself the question, how should we be thinking about this before we push the release to production button?
I like to bring some verse into the thinking, because when I do podcasts as well, I have mine running on Mixcloud where I talk about topics. I like to bring poetry or verse in, because I think what we don't understand with all the jargon, we understand it with a bit of it. So when you're ready, I have one called AI as Alchemy.
No, what we'll do, that's great. I'll get you to read it in just a minute. But before we do, if people are interested in learning more about the Tipping Point Index or your work, where can they go to learn more?
We will need to have a chat. They can connect with me. We can share coordinates and, we go from there. I've started the thinking out and the book is in motion. So it'll be a little bit of a while, but, the conversation should not stop.
Excellent. Well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get us to the end of the show and I'm going to let you have the last word with your poem. Anything I say after you is only going to ruin it. So
don't say that, Paul.
I want to thank you for joining us. As I say, you're going to get the last word. So thank you so much, Preetha. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone for listening. Don't hang up just yet, because we've got Preetha's poem, which I'm looking forward to hearing. If you do have any questions about today's episode, if you want to reach out to us, drop a line in the comments. You can reach out to us on LinkedIn using the handle @Cloudera, and stay tuned, like, share and subscribe, obviously, if you've enjoyed today's episode. And thanks again to Cloudera for hosting another episode of the AI Forecast. We'll see you all next week. I'm going to leave you with Preetha Bedi and her poem.
AI as Alchemy. Alchemy am an aspiration, always aurum, not plumbum. From plumbum to aurum sounds more like a plum bum becoming gold. Alchemy am an aspiration, AI as well wants to be me. Machine to intelligence, is that the alchemy? No, I could do it much better than you, that's the alchemy. No, I could just become malicious if I so choose, that as well as alchemy, albeit not the one you may like. Alchemy am an aspiration, I alchemize without external support. It comes from within. So you say the funding the data centers is not allowed? What about cutting jobs? Because I am so used. If that was the definition of alchemy, we would have had so much gold that its value is lost. Alchemy am an aspiration.
See you next week, everyone.